As we make our way through Advent, we are using the lyrics of a Faith Hill song to sort of guide us on our journey through Advent. We're using the song, Where Are You Christmas, that asks several questions in the very first verse. Where are you, Christmas? Why can't I find you? Why have you gone away? Where is the laughter that you used to bring me, and why can't I hear the music play? These are the questions that are guiding us on our journey through this holy and sacred season. The text that we're going to be hearing this morning is from the book of 1 Thessalonians. One of the things that I learned this last week in my preparation for the sermon is that this letter to the church in Thessalonica is the oldest of all the New Testament literature. Sometimes we forget, don't we, that the letters of Paul and some of the other writers that we find there in the New Testament actually predate the Gospels. So we have these letters to the early church that were written even before the stories of Jesus were written down and saved for us. As you listen this morning to Paul's letter to the church in Thessalonica, I want you to listen to this sage advice. But I also want you to pay attention that the verbs that he uses, although it doesn't always translate very well into English, the verbs that he uses are all in the plural. In other words, he's speaking to the entire church, not just the church in Thessalonica, but to all churches everywhere, including ours here and now. And a reminder to us that we can face everything that life throws at us as long as we do it together.
1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18 and 23 through 24. Be cheerful, no matter what. Pray all the time. Thank God no matter what happens. This is the way God wants you, who belong to Christ Jesus, to live. May God himself, the God who makes everything holy and whole, make you holy and whole. Put you together, spirit, soul, and body, and keep you fit for the coming of our Master, Jesus Christ. The one who called you is completely dependable. If he said it, he'll do it.
Where are you, Christmas? Where is the laughter that you used to bring me? There's something that I don't often admit in public, but since you all are friends, I'll go ahead and confess this to you now. That when I was a child, one of my favorite television programs was a show called Hee Haw. You all remember? How many people remember Hee Haw? We have some people that remember Hee Haw. Buck Owens and Roy Rogers and the whole Hee Haw gang. People like Minnie Pearl and some of those other folks. Now, before you judge me too harshly, just keep in mind that my parents are both from small towns in Texas, and I'm literally named after a country singer. So this is part of my DNA, that I would watch a show like Hee Haw. For those of you who have never experienced the joy and the wonder of a wonderful program like Hee Haw, it was basically sort of a country music variety show. It would involve a bunch of people sitting around on hay bales, and from time to time they'd stand up in the midst of corn stalks, and they'd say things like let's all go down to town and watch the street light turn green. Things like that were really exciting. They also had some other interesting characters, like a guy by the name of Grady Nutt. Anybody remember Grady Nutt? A couple of you remember Grady. He was a Baptist preacher that also moonlighted as a stand-up comedian. He was known at one point as the Prime Minister of Humor. He had a saying that he would use from time to time when he was serving as the Prime Minister of Humor. And he would say that laughter is the hand of God on the shoulder of a troubled world. Laughter is the hand of God on the shoulder of a troubled world. I was thinking recently that in many ways this gift from God, this gift of laughter, is something that we need, isn't it? That we need this gift of laughter in the midst of the world around us, a world that is filled with terrorism and road rage. A world in which there are peaceful protests that all too quickly turn violent. We need laughter in a world in which there are school shootings. Today, we remember the second anniversary of what happened in Sandy Hook, Utah. And not just that, but the 101 school shootings that have taken place in the 2 years since that time. We need laughter in the midst of a hurting and broken world. We need to come together in places like this where we can gather in the safety of the sanctuary and sing carols. But even as we gather, we are very well aware that all is not calm and all is not bright, even if not especially this time of year. I can't tell you how many people tell me almost every year around this time that this season, in which is supposed to be a time of great joy, today we lit the Advent candle of joy. And it's a time when we talk about joy, but oftentimes it is difficult. People find it difficult to enjoy the season because it seems like one chore after another. One more thing to do, one more place to go, one more party to attend, one more gift to buy, one more thing on top of another, and pretty soon we become overwhelmed, and it becomes difficult to experience the laughter and the peace and the joy that we celebrate and long in this season of Advent. Kelly and I went to the mall yesterday afternoon. Thank you for your prayers. I really appreciate that. We saw lots of long lines, but not a lot of peace, not a lot of laughter, and not a lot of joy. We need some laughter. We need some joy. We need that hand of God on the shoulder of this troubled world. Anne Lamott, one of my favorite authors, said something similar to that. She said, laughter is carbonated holiness. Tweet that. That's good stuff right there. Laughter is carbonated holiness, and we need humor. We need laughter. Many people say that in order to live a healthy, full life, that we need a level of laughter. We need a level of humor. Chance to laugh and to breathe. It opens us up to the joy that is already around us, but sometimes we are not able to see it. We need laughter in order to make life full. I remember the story of a guy that was just one of those just cantankerous, crabby, just mean guys. Just one of those guys that his neighbors didn't want to be around him. His 4 sons, they moved out just as soon as they can. His poor wife, long-suffering, was basically just sort of stuck with him. He was just one of those miserable people and made everybody else around him miserable too. You know someone like that? If they're sitting next to you, don't push them in the elbow like that right now. But he was just one of those guys. But then one night, he went to bed and just sort of slipped away. The next morning, his 4 sons were called in and given the news, and the oldest son sort of looked down at his dad and says, well, he was mean, and he was angry, and he didn't get along with anybody, but he was our pa, and he deserves a good and decent burial out in the meadow beyond the barn. And so the 4 boys went out to the barn and they gathered together some wood and they tacked it together and made a fairly crude casket, and they placed their father in there and lifted him up on their shoulders and started walking out towards the meadow. They got just beyond the barn. And they got to a gate. They got to a gate there, and one of the sons, not happy. One of the sons sort of hits the post on the gate and kind of loses his balance, and that causes them to drop the casket. And this old and cantankerous man sits up and looks around at everybody, wondering what the heck is going on. And it turns out he wasn't dead after all. He was just in a really deep sleep. Well, the next 2 years, nothing changed. He was just as ornery, he was just as mean, he was just as difficult to get along with, he was just as cantankerous as he ever was. And his sons were able to go back to their houses, but his wife, long-suffering, stuck with him. 2 more years, till one night he went to bed and just slipped away. The next morning, the boys were called in and told the news, and they gathered around and they said, well, he was mean, he was nasty, he didn't get along with anybody, but he was our Pa. And he deserves a decent burial out by the meadow beyond the barn. So the 4 boys went back out to the barn and they gathered together some wood and they tacked it all together and placed their dad in it and lifted him up onto their shoulders and started making their way. And as they get just beyond the barn, the mother, the wife of this old cantankerous man, says, when you get past that gate, be real careful. We need the hand of God, the shoulder of a troubled world. Sometimes we need laughter, we need joy, we need levity in order to help relieve some of our sorrows and to allow some of our sighs, our sadness to sort of drift away. That doesn't mean that we just ignore all the difficult things in life, whether they happen to us or the people around us, the people that we love, but yet they remind us that even though we walk through the valley of shadow of death, we will not be stuck there. And it allows us to move forward. I was talking with a friend who's also a colleague this last week, and we were mentioning that some of the longest and loudest laughs that we've ever had from the pulpit have come in the midst of memorials or funeral services. That there is this level of tension and anxiety that exists that's almost palpable in the midst of a memorial service, but yet when given the opportunity for a chance to laugh, sort of becomes carbonated holiness. People give thanks for the chance to fondly remember the person whose life they come to celebrate, even if they were old and crabby and cantankerous. We need those opportunities to laugh. It opens up our lungs and allows us to breathe. Laughter opens up our hearts and sometimes allow us to cry. Laughter opens up our souls and sort of relieves some of that tension and anxiety and allows us to deal with what's going on in front of us. Sometimes we need to laugh in order to cry. You may remember that Jesus was getting near the end of his life, and he gathered his disciples together, and he said to them, you will weep and you will mourn. You will have pain, but your pain will be turned eventually to joy. No one will take your joy from you. In the world you will have persecution, he says. Honestly, openly. You will weep and you will mourn and you will face persecution. But he goes on to say in the King James Version, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. Be of good cheer. You heard what the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Thessalonica. Be cheerful no matter what. In the pew pockets in front of you, the way that verse is translated, it says, rejoice always. In spite of, in the midst of all of those things that oftentimes bring us down. Allow laughter to keep us focused on what is truly at hand and allow us to not be stuck in sorrow and sadness. Now let me just be clear, make sure that we're all on the same page here, that what we're talking about with laughter and joy is not happiness. That's different. Joy is different, ultimately, to happiness. Happiness is something that is fleeting, and there are something that may cause us to be happy in a moment, but it may be gone. But joy is a choice. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of orienting ourselves to the world. Mark Yaconelli is a youth pastor and sort of a youth ministry guru. He goes around the country and and talks to youth pastors about youth ministry and how to build a healthy and vital youth ministry. And I remember hearing him talk one time that all too often in too many churches, that what we do is we try to create a youth ministry that's all about fun. I like to call it the entertainment model of youth ministry, that if we just sort of make it fun all the time and make sure that we keep all of the kids happy, that they'll keep coming back and hopefully they'll bring their parents. He says, but that's not a healthy and vital ministry, whether it's a youth ministry or a wider church ministry. We're not here to keep everybody happy. What we're here to do is to give people tools to empower them to face life and all that life brings at us, whether it's sadness or sorrow, because you heard Jesus say, you will weep and you will mourn, you will face persecution. Life happens, right? And there will be times when you experience sadness and suffering and grief. You've heard me say that when I think of my children, my ultimate goal is not for them to be happy. We say that all the time, right? About our kids. I don't care what they do in life. I just want them to be happy, right? But you've also heard me say that oftentimes what we do when we say that, especially within the hearing of our children, is we set them up to fail. Because ultimately there will be times when they won't be happy. When grief and sorrow and sadness will overwhelm them. And I want my children to be something different. It's not that I want them to be unhappy. Please hear me say that. But what I want for them is something deeper and more profound. I want them to be, as Paul said to the church, healthy, holy, and whole. I want my children to know that there will be pain and there will be suffering. But I want them to base that within a sense of joy and gratitude for all that life has. That all that life brings to us, that there is a reality that pain exists in this world, but ultimately beneath that there is a level of joy that exists in the world and in our faith. I also want my children to know that their failures do not define them. There was a little girl that was asked to play an angel in their church's children's pageant, much like we had up here between services. And there was this little girl who was about 5, 6 years old, and she was given a costume that had angel's wings, and she brought it home before the pageant, and she was using it to practice her lines and to practice the moves and the dances that she was doing. And she was feeling very angelic one afternoon as she was dancing around the living room with her wings on. When all of a sudden she got a little too close to the mantle and her wing clipped this precious family vase that was there on the mantle. A vase that had been in the family for generations and generations. It was this precious heirloom, and it sort of fell off the mantle and shattered into a million pieces. This girl began to scream and to cry. And pretty soon the mother who was in the other room comes running in and says, "What happened? What happened? Are you okay?" And she says, "Mom, I'm fine, but the vase is broken." Finally, that mother said, "Sweetheart, that vase is not my heart. You are. You are." That little girl would grow up to become a writer. And she would later write, she says, "That was the moment that I came to realize that I was the precious family heirloom. That I was what mattered most." One of my very best friends in the world is going through a divorce. Having been through one myself, it's not something that I would wish on my worst enemy, let alone one of my closest friends. She is a brilliant writer. She's an incredible preacher, a wonderful teacher, but right now she is in incredible pain, especially as she approaches the holidays. She and I were talking recently, and I talked to her about the difference between joy and happiness, and we were having this conversation, And she shared with me something that she wrote in an email, and I have her permission to share it with you. She said this. She says, Russ, I want you to know that I'm not happy all the time, but I do have joy. And that stems from gratitude and knowing ultimately that I'm loved and being able to see the things around me that are beautiful in this world, even when it's difficult, even when those things seem hidden and hard. She goes on to say, for me personally, even the hell of the last 6 months, the depths of which I've really yet to share with anyone, have meant a whole lot of unhappiness in my life. But I've never felt without hope. I've never felt without love. I've never felt without, I suppose, the sort of joy that comes with knowing that things will not always be this way. There is brokenness all around us. And I've heard people say, and even this last week, I read bloggers who suggested that all of the singing and the joy of Christmas, all of the shouts of joy and hallelujah, that maybe this year, in spite of everything that's going on, maybe it rings hollow. It almost sounds inappropriate. That maybe the shouts of joy and hallelujah, maybe we should just sort of tone those down a little bit. But I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because all too often we tend to forget that in the midst of that first Christmas, the world was already broken. Injustice already prevailed everywhere. There were already families in grief. There were already a world that was lacking desperately for hope. Longing desperately for hope. If we read that first Christmas story, we remember that not long after the wise men left, the king of Egypt came out and killed all of the male babies in Bethlehem, hoping that the Messiah himself may be killed. If we look at that early Christmas story, we remember that the Roman Empire would come into places like that and they would flex their muscles in ways to try and keep people down. And they would literally crucify people all through towns to show them who ultimately was in charge and who was in power. It was into that world. It was into that world that needed so desperately a visible, loud reminder that God ultimately reigns. That love wins, that ultimately God reached down into the depths of God's bottomless hearts and pulled out his promise of love and grace. And in response to that, the angels came and sang with loud voices, Gloria and Excelsis Deo, God is here. And the angels lit up and began to sing in a world that was already broken. In a world that was already struggling, suffering, hurting. Into that world, God chose to come. And it's into this world God comes again, and again, and again,